Hi, this week's Weekly Roundup is pretty special because it's episode number 42. It also has FPGAs, SBCs, even more FPGAs, and something that goes up to 11. There's not a heck of a lot happening on Kickstarter at the moment, but here's another simple Kickstarter campaign for a Nixie tube using the HV5122 driver from Microchip. A fairly decent one, and this also has RGB LED backlights. And a coin slot processor kit created by Patrick Thomas, which is his 24th campaign. It's a board based on a PIC18F1220 IC and provides connectivity to an Arduino or similar, or in freestanding mode, allowing you control over door locks and actuators. This next one is interesting. The Turtle Rover is a small robot designed on the Mars rover. It's a Raspberry Pi powered robot with a rocker bogie suspension and watertight chassis, allowing it to cross some hostile terrain. Even with added features such as Wi-Fi, 1080p video streaming and robotic gripper arm, it is expensive, coming in at almost €1,700. But they offer a beta tester option where you can drive this thing remotely on 3 1.5-hour missions of various complexities. And here's another campaign for a button and display board for the Pi. It has 6 buttons, 1.3-inch OLED display, power switch, IR and 3 I2C ports. Not sure if they are 3 separate buses or just a daisy chain connector. And my prediction of FPGA boards hitting the mainstream maker market is starting to happen. This board is a Pi hat containing a Xilinx FPGA, which will happily emulate a NES in silicon. Although the SMD footprint will allow higher density FPGAs, giving you more grunt. If you're a retro gamer, then I'd start becoming very interested in FPGAs, as you will be able to emulate even the more complex arcade and console games that are currently impossible to play on existing emulation software. This next one isn't really a maker product, but there seems to be a rise in smart keyboards, which are just USB keyboards with programmable buttons. I've been looking for things like this as I want to build my own video editing console. This one was interesting as it uses a capacitive touch OLED display with conductive transparent buttons on top, so you get the tactile feel of buttons with a cheap OLED display underneath. Surprisingly, there's nothing interesting on Indiegogo, and Crowd Supply only has one interesting thing. The Arduino is a small board containing an STM32 MCU, LoRa RFM69 and TMP102 temperature sensor. It fits into the same space as a AA battery, so all you need to do is put it into one of those AA battery packs, connect up power and ground, and you're away. Over in the UK, SL Technology have several RFID boards supporting both reading and writing of all the RFID card types. This one is a USB based board allowing connectivity to a PC. Then there's a Pi hat, which also breaks out several useful GPIOs for buzzers and buttons, and 2 other standalone boards. RS Online currently has the Pi hat for £33. Another SBC to be excited about, the Cadus Vim 2, is here. This board is a step up from the previous by running the 8-core AM Logic 6912, HDMI 2.0 up to 4K at 60 Hz, gigabit Ethernet, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, USB 2.0 sadly, SD slot and either 2GB or 3GB DDR4 RAM, and 16, 32 or 64GB eMMC, depending on which model you get. It comes in the Basic, Pro and Max versions. Power is via USB-C or, interestingly, via onboard pogo pads with a 4A current limiting switch. And just when you thought the strange product names were over with, the Orange Pi guys have come out with the Orange Pi R1. This SBC has the same All-Winner H2 sock as the original Pi Zero, but has 200 megabit Ethernet ports, which I'm assuming is the reason for the R1 name, as they might be aiming this as a small router. Although one of the Ethernet ports is driven off USB, so not sure about the throughput. This board also contains Wi-Fi. In Weekly Roundup number 41, I mentioned the Odroid HC1. Well, now it's available from hard kernel for the slated $49. Back in Weekly Roundup number 28, I mentioned the NVIDIA TX1, which is a pretty decent board, but comes at a hefty price of around $600. Now NVIDIA are making it available for around $200, The only catch is that you have to join up to the NVIDIA developer program, which will be screened of course, but a good option to get your hands on one fairly cheaply. One of my patrons, Mike Schinkel, sent me this one. The friendly guys have come out with a variant of their NanoPi called the NanoPi Duo. It's a breadboard style SBC that runs the Allwinner H2 Plus, 512 megabytes RAM, SPI flash, SD slot and Wi-Fi. Measures only 25 by 50 millimeters and breaks out Ethernet, USB and a bunch of GPIOs. You can use it standalone or plugged into this, which is a Pi form factor board containing USB, Ethernet, small Pi header and an M-SATA slot. Nice. Tindy has some interesting stuff this week. This Tindy store has released several FPGA boards in the past. Here's another one that runs the 16 MHz clocked ICE 40LP8K FPGA with a 4 megabit SPI flash loader and 23 GPIOs running off a 3.3 volt supply. And here's a couple more of the customizable keyboards. This one based on an Arduino Uno with long stroke keys, and this one with short stroke clicky keys. Both are accessed via I2C or UART. This small Pi hat has an onboard MPU 9255 9DOF IMU and is designed to take up the least number of GPIOs on your Pi. This IMU has its own onboard digital motion processor, which offloads a lot of the complex fusion algorithms. This is a cool board based on the open source ESP radio. Contains everything you need to stream internet radio channels. Contains a 1.8-inch TFT, battery management, audio amplifier and headphone jack. Tarocco is a closed-loop DC motor controller with quad encoder feedback. It will allow steps of up to 3,200 per revolution, driving a 36-volt 10-amp motor. It also has current limiting to avoid motor burnout and torque control. Here's a fairly small add-on for the teensy from Pesky Products, giving you access to an NRF 52832 Bluetooth module. And here's a small board that will interface to Amazon Alexa. Contains an ESP32, ICS 43434 MEMS mic, Max 98357 DAC, OLED and LiPo charging. Just enough to create your own tiny Amazon Echo. Another one from Pesky Products. This time a small Calipile Thermopile IR temperature sensor. These ICs are pretty cool and will allow you to detect human presence fairly accurately. Connectivity is via I2C and there's also an interrupt out, so you can wake up a sleeping MCU. If you haven't ever seen Spinal Tap, I'd suggest you stop this video now, go and watch it and then come back, because you won't understand this relay hat that goes up to 11. Simply, it's a timed relay that will switch a certain duration after power is cut. The really good thing about this one goes up to 11. This next one is a cool idea. Originally designed for Bitcoin mining, it will monitor your PC for lockups and automatically reboot. Of course, if you were running a real operating system like Linux, you wouldn't ever see any lockups. What?
You can't say that.
Oh, okay, sorry. There's a couple of interesting things in from the major storefronts this week. Seed Studio have an excellent heatsink and dual cooling fan unit for your Pi. This one isn't PWM controlled, but is a great addition for any Pi. They also have the tiny ESP8285 Wi-Fi SoC module, which breaks out 14 GPIOs onto a small edge connector. Back in Weekly Roundup number 36, I mentioned the Helite Grove board. Well, Seed now have the Helite Core module. Accessible by UART on 3 different connector styles, it'll give you an audio processing unit that detects sounds that can be generated by humans, such as whistling or even DTMF tones. They also have a small relay board that this module can be soldered onto, giving you a 240 volt 5 amp relay powered from a 5 volt DC jack. They also have the Arduino, which is a small Atmega 32U4 based board with IR sensor and a couple of RGB LEDs. Easy add-on to any SBC or PC that doesn't have an IR receiver. Over at Adafruit, they have their Trinket M0, which runs the mighty SAM D21 packed into this tiny board. They ship it with CircuitPython firmware already pre-installed, and only pushing out 5 of the 26 GPIOs that the SAM D21 is capable of. They also have the Feather NRF52 Pro, which runs the now common NRF52832 Bluetooth module. It contains all the usual Feather options like LiPo charging, but this board is designed to be used with Minute real-time operating system, so you won't be able to use the Arduino IDE with it. They also have a bunch of HDMI converters, which are really handy if you have a screen with a flat ribbon cable. Over at SparkFun, they have the Pixie Cam 5 back in stock, which offloads image processing for you, capable of keeping up with the 640 by 480 50Hz onboard camera, can recognise and track a dozen objects within frame. They also have in a 72-channel GPS receiver with onboard compass. Really useful thing to have for autonomous vehicles. And there's a whole bunch of interesting things from China this week. Over at IC Station, they are offloading 500 switches for less than $20 US, which works out to around 4 cents per switch. Or 80 plain through hole PCB buttons for only $3. Stock up on your switches. Elecro have an Arduino Leonardo compatible board with an onboard SIM800 GSM module and 4 relays. Good if you're in countries supporting the SIM800, but from what I hear, it isn't officially supported in Australia. Banggood have these cheap 0.9-inch OLED displays. I'll be picking up a couple of these for my Uber video editing console. And if you're ever in need of an I2C EEPROM, these are pretty handy for prototyping and cheap as well. There's also this handy Hall effect current sensor breakout, which will translate a 0 to 50 amp pass-through current to a 0 to 3 volt voltage level. These are pretty cheap, but note as of June this year, this particular chip has been discontinued. If you want to program a board that has an ISP header, you'll need one of these. It's a simple enough board with USB port one end and an ISP header the other. If you have a PC requiring a lot of cooling or just have an Uber cluster running, then this simple board breaks out 8 fan headers from a single SATA power connector. No PWM, just a simple off, low and high switch. And this is pretty cool, 10 ULN2003 stepper motor driver boards for less than $10. Nice. And then there's this Arduino compatible board running the ESP32. Handy if you want to experiment with them easily. Now during my searches I came across a bunch of FPGA and CPLD boards on AliExpress. There's this one based on the Altera EPM240, which isn't really an FPGA but a CPLD. However, thought that this was a good board to get if you wanted to experiment with buttons, LEDs and UARTs being driven from a CPLD. There's also this one, which is cheaper. Then there's this Altera EPM3064 CPLD board, breaking out a bunch of the 66 GPIOs coming from this chip. Has a micro USB and programming header that can be broken off after programming. Or this one, based on the Altera EPM2032 CPLD. Or this one, based on the Xilinx XC9572 CPLD. However, if you want some grunt behind your real-time applications, then there's this board based on the Altera EP4CE FPGA. Gives you a bunch of buttons, LEDs, UARTs, USB and GPIO headers. Or this smaller version with just the FPGA and supporting circuitry. Another step up for FPGAs is the Xilinx XC6SLX9. This board has 256 MB SRAM, EEPROM, SD card and VGA camera support. This is one FPGA that you can start to do real-time video analysis with. All these boards running the Xilinx XC-SLX16, which is a step up from the LX9 series. These boards don't have all the extra bits, so would be useful for people already familiar with FPGAs. If you ever read any of Douglas Adams' books, then you'd know that 42 is the answer to the meaning of life. As a side note, if you take the ASCII value of 42, it translates to an asterisk, which equates to everything. So there you go. Thanks for watching and see you next week.